Welcome to the Starting Pixel podcast, episode number 7, where we're going to be talking with Sarah Thomas Moffat. My name's Rob Chandler.
I am Michelle Bonnard.
How are you?
Good, yeah. How are you?
I'm not too bad. I'm drowning in learning how to become a podcast producer at the moment.
That's not something that I would like to take the mantle of, so thank you very much for doing that. How is
That's
that?
absolutely fine. It's interesting. It's interesting. I think the good news is that we've got, slated weekly guests until June.
That's very exciting. That feels like
Already.
I've got film school until June, which is amazing. That's great.
Right, but where are you? What have you been up to?
My week has been good. I have been learning lines mainly this week, which as I get older, my brain does not absorb words like it used to absorb words. So I am changing my line learning process. So I've been learning lines. I'm doing a job where we shoot me making a speech in character, and then we cut away to other things happening, and then we come back to me making the speech and cut away. And so I've been writing the bits in between because I was like, well, I can't get from there to there, and I'm pretty sure they're going to shoot the whole thing. So I've kind of been learning lines, writing a few lines, which is all the actor prep stuff, which has been exciting. And yeah, developing an episode of a TV show with a brilliant writer called Rachel Flowerday, which is exciting. So we're
Cool.
yeah,
A world I
good.
know nothing about, but hopefully soon we'll do.
Well,
That's cool.
It's
That's
been
cool.
good. Yeah, it's been really good.
Good.
It's been a good
Good.
week. Yeah,
Should we get our guest in?
I'm very excited.
Yeah, let's get her in.
Yeah, let's get Sarah in. I'm
Here we
excited
go.
to talk to her. Sarah.
Here's Sarah.
Hello.
Hey, so nice
Let
to
me-
see you. Thank you for having me.
That's a pleasure. Right, let me do my intro. This is the bit I spend seconds on curating and writing.
This is the edit.
This is it. Today we're joined by Sarah Thomas Moffat, distinguished Scottish-Canadian cinematographer whose 25-year career spans diverse genres, from the raw authenticity of documentaries to the innovative, I can never say that word.
Innovative, go on.
Thank you.
Innovative
Realm of virtual production. Sarah has recently directed and filmed a virtual production segment for Canon's C400, showcasing her expertise in cutting-edge filmmaking techniques. She is also actively sharing her knowledge on virtual production and cinematography through platforms like Illuminatrix. Is that right?
Illuminatrix. Sorry.
Cool. That's right. No. So I'm nearly there. I'm nearly the last sentence.
Okay.
Sarah's dedication to integrating emerging technologies into storytelling makes her the perfect guest to explore the future of cinematography. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome.
That's cool. So how about starting off with, tell us a bit in not in hours, a bit about your 25-year career span. How did you get into what you're doing, and sort of what's your journey been?
Yeah, super. 25 plus years and counting, probably close to 30 as I don't want to date myself, but there you go. It really started in stills photography for me as a kid. That was the most interesting thing to me, was a camera over a doll. And then it was really my father that started to recognize that and teach me how to take pictures properly.
Right.
He took up work in book and magazine publishing and layouts, and he was a photographer, but really at heart, he was a painter. And then it sort of progressed, and here we are today.
Wow. So did you go to college to learn your craft, or how did you get in, sort of cross that bridge to cinematography?
Sure. It was, so I did go to college in Ontario to a school called Centennial College, and I really want to go into this area of filmmaking. I'm passionate about movies. I grew up watching Star Wars. I loved all that stuff, and so I found some programs. There wasn't a film school like American Film Institute or British Film Institute in Toronto or anywhere in Canada. And so I found this broadcast program at a college, and it was a 3-year program.
In my head, Canada's quite got a rich filmmaking seam to it. But what you're saying is there actually aren't that many schools. So do people learn their crafts somewhere else and then come back to Canada to do it?
Both. It's changed today. There are more independent institutions and localized film schools, and universities are now implementing film production into their curriculum, which wasn't the case when I was starting school. So
Oh, yeah.
mid late 90s, and yeah, it was really the mid 90s. It just wasn't available.
And I think even in other places where it was available, there was a kind of, I don't know, I don't know if this is fair to say, but there's a kind of masculine kind of slightly entitled in the mid 90s vibe to lots of those places, because I remember deciding whether to go to drama school or whether to go to film school, and just being like, oh, I don't want to, like, it didn't feel like a place for me. And that might be wrong, but yeah, it's a
Yeah,
the
definitely.
the thought that you went off and kind of experienced stuff. And then, so on that broadcasting course, what were you looking at over those 3 years?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it was radio and television broadcasting focused, but there was a film, there was a photography element and darkroom available to us.
Hmm.
So I did a lot of prints and my own stuff in the darkroom at the same time. And then there was a film in our third year. We had a student film, which we shot on 16 millimeter on a Bolex.
Amazing.
Right.
Yeah, and that was the first time that I actually heard motion picture film go through a camera. And
Hmm.
I was like super excited right away. And then I released the trigger right away. And I was like, this is money. This is costing so much money. Oh my God. And so and it was interesting because I come from a stills photography background. One of the first things my dad taught me was to hold my breath while I was taking a picture
Yeah.
and
Right.
just hold the camera. He showed, really trained me how to hold it like a journalist, frame up and wait.
And do you find that you still hold your breath, or do you find that you breathe with the action now as a cinematographer? Because it's different, isn't it? It's a different. There's a kind of, there's a moving story happening with you. What's your?
Totally. I completely hold my breath. So I'm still in a shot. If I have to operate, I'm like,
Mm, yeah, yeah,
That's brilliant. That's
that's
cool.
great.
So you did that. So what about the what was your first, I don't know, what was your first shoot like when where was that? What was Tell us a little bit about your sort of, your
yeah.
where it all came to life.
So the journey was interesting because I landed a really coveted internship at a very successful, at the time, commercial production company in the city in Toronto. And a lot of the American companies from New York were coming up to Toronto to shoot commercials. And so I ended up PAing and quickly becoming a camera assistant through a program in the Canadian Society of Cinematographers, worked my way up and went back to the camera department guys who I was a PA with. And I said, look, now I have a piece of paper that says I'm a camera assistant. So then they let me start to load their magazines of film and be a second AC. And it was seriously large budgets at the
Hmm.
time. Those commercials at the time were so creative, and the art departments and the production designers were masterful. I always knew I wanted to do camera things, but the art process of it visually was a lot of fun and a lot of teamwork. And
So what was your first interaction with virtual production?
yeah, that's a fun one. So I was in Los Angeles early 2022. I was living in Vancouver at the time and got on my motorcycle and I rode to Los Angeles, and I ended up staying for almost 2 years in LA with a US work visa. I thought I was only going to stay for a couple months and just check it out. And then one thing led to another.
And then you found an amazing motorcycle cafe, right?
Yes. And then I filmed my motorcycle in virtual production.
Amazing.
That was the first thing. And so yep, I had my motorbike down there. I knew people at companies. That the reason I tell that story is because that's the first thing I filmed in a virtual production environment. And it was at Airy in Burbank, as a head office and rental shop side. And they were just starting to build what they called the Airy Creative Space. And it was a small virtual production wall with a couple of engineers working in house. So I zip over to Airy and they're like, yeah, come on in. We want to show you what we're making. And I go into the creative space and there's the wall. And the first thing I said was, I have to bring my motorcycle in here. Can I shoot my motorcycle in here? And they went, okay.
Yeah?
So yeah. So we worked out a time and date, and the engineers wanted to test some things with Unreal Engine. It was very early days, and I just wanted to experiment and test out lighting and things. And they had never worked with a DP before, so it was a really great conversation of my world and their worlds, right? And lighting in those worlds. And so we did some really cool shots with some beautiful area equipment. And then I was able to cut a little demo reel right from that. And then threw that out in the world and said, okay, this is what I'm doing. This is really cool.
We're going to cut to an ad first, a word from our sponsors, because we're about to go into part two. Part two is all about Sarah's experience with virtual production. This episode is brought to you by Morden Wolf. Not sure where to start? How big a stage do you actually need? What about driving plates? Do you even need them? Is Unreal Engine necessary? Wait, what is Unreal Engine? You're thinking about virtual location scouting, but should you? How much is this all going to cost? And the big one, am I about to wreck my career by going the virtual production route? Yeah, there's lots of questions, and guessing your way through virtual production isn't the answer. That's where Morden Wolf comes in. We're an independent virtual production supervision studio, here to guide you from cradle to grave, whether you're just dipping your toes into VP or knee deep in LED walls and camera tracking. We make sure you get exactly what you need. No overspending, no mishaps, just the right solution for your production. So if you need someone in your corner, choose Morden Wolf. Visit mordenwolf.com to find out more. Morden Wolf, why film it any other way? Welcome back, everyone.
Hello.
This
Welcome
is
back, Sarah.
organized chaos. Organized chaos. So, thank you for all of that. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to ask you some questions that I ask every other guest that we come on. There are 3 questions. They are so in as fewer words as possible. What is virtual production?
Virtual production is a storytelling tool in the world of visual story creation.
Blimey, you win the award for the least words used, I think. That's pretty cool. Yeah, nice work.
Yeah.
Nice work. That's really good, actually. Any Ed, did you want to build anything around that, or are you happy just to leave that microphone on the floor? You're done with that, yeah? Yeah, cool. I think you've alluded a bit to my second question, which was sort of what was your aha moment, right? Which was what it was. Yeah, just go through it again. Actually, what was your your aha moment? You saw this thing happen, and it was like, wow, okay, this looks like a thing.
The aha moment in virtual production for me was when I had my motorcycle in that creative space with that wall. And we had an asset from Unreal Engine on the wall. And it was Matrix City, which was a very common used asset at the time. And the engineers were testing out different motion scaling things with that. I decided to shoot the headlight of the motorcycle down the lens of the camera and put physical lights on the floor versus the grid. And I turned most of the lights off that were in the grid that was built. And I put lights on the floor. We had some area orbital lights in the house, and had great grip tools as well. And there were sky panels in the ceiling, but I took most of those off, started hitting things from the ground as if I were lighting in a real physical world. And the debate at the time was that you can't point lights at a virtual production wall. And I can explain that later. But I shaped it with some flags and blacks and put the headlight right down the lens and just built enough ambience around the bike that it looked like it was coming from the actual sun that was in the virtual space, which I had also built the composition on with them. I moved it down and I moved the highlights down and created mood like it was sunset. And so I can show you a piece of that so you can see where it is. And in that moment, when we all saw it on the lens and we saw it on the monitors, everybody went, whoa. And I was like, yes.
That's cool.
Because that was the transfer of traditional lighting and thinking straight on like a cinematographer, not feeling limited by the concerns of working in a virtual environment and just going for it.
Just leaning into it. That's cool. That's exciting. Last question before we get to talk about other things. What in your mind is the biggest misconception when it comes to virtual production, or maybe new technology for filmmaking, storytelling, but through the virtual production lens?
I think that would, in my experience so far, that would come from a producer fear that they don't understand the capacity and they're afraid to make the investment.
Yeah.
And the capacity is a really beautiful way to problem solve, to create new ideas, new shots, and tell stories in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear of not having done it or done it and had a bad experience hesitates that onset of release of budget into using virtual production in a production.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think fear, I mean, that's completely valid, right? I mean, it is a fearful, especially if you've heard horror stories about it, or it's something that you're either forced into, or, when you start talking to someone about it, they start talking in a very different language to what you've experienced. Most people in this business are, their reputation is just the job that's just happened as well. So I can completely understand that fear, but I mean, it's a really, really interesting point. So thank you for those three. It was really great. So what about talk us about your experience then with using it as through the lens of a cinematographer. Excuse that enormous pun. That was I didn't even think about that. I might write that down. You can use that.
I don't know that I will.
No, fair enough. Typical. So tell us about, your experience for that, 10, 15 minutes, using technology.
So, one of the really exciting things that I started to experience when I began working in virtual production and still do today is the just expansion of my mind. It felt like the Matrix. So I could just plug me in and, because you start working in a 3D space and you're using gaming technology and a three-dimensional world on a 2D object in a three-dimensional space. And I was just like, give me more. And so I love that every single time I have to, whether it's for education stuff like I just recently did, or it's on a shoot, which some commercial stuff I've done. It's exciting for my mind to go into that play space. And it's a lot of work depending on the scale of the scope of the size of the production, because as a cinematographer, I'm now thinking about all of the light in the 3D world. And I'm thinking about the composition in the 3D world and the shadows in the 3D world and the color. And that's just the look of it. Then I'm also thinking of the quality of it, the resolution of it, the technical aspects of it, the calibration of it on the wall. And I'm thinking about the wall and I'm thinking about the processor. So the steps before it even gets to the camera sensor, it's coming from Unreal Engine computer console to the processor to the LED tiles, passing through light that's coming from set that we're building in, and then hitting the camera sensor, which also has its own LET applied to it and maybe some filters that I put on, and then going to a DIT. There's all these steps of process that the color and picture are going through.
So there's light everywhere, right? And you talked about painting with light earlier and kind of your dabbling artist, and there's.
And here's a question:
Yes.
Do you feel it's your responsibility of a cinematographer to own the light or what's happening in the 3D world light-wise, or is your responsibility the physical lighting the talent, or lighting the physical world? I mean, you can sort of direct it. I get that, change the sun and maybe this, but sort of where do you feel your responsibility is, and it's sort of somebody else's or the light on the wall?
Both. I know that there are shows that, for example, Fallout, which was a really fantastic use of virtual production technology within their production. They did a great job of it. And they were literally creating positions that didn't exist just to facilitate the size and scale. And one thing they did was they brought on a virtual production or a virtual Unreal Engine DP person, which is finessed in the 3D space of moving light around and building to work with the DP and the gaffer in the physical space, so that when the DP wanted something adjusted in the 3D world, they could just directly talk to the Unreal Engine person instead of going through a chain of command to make that happen. So they started to work more closely on set through iPads to move things around more quickly. So that's become a workflow for bigger productions, which I think is needed because it's too much in general for a cinematographer to do both at the same time.
Because you would not be moving the sun, right, in the real world. Although you would have chosen where to shoot on location recce's with the director, right, based on where the sun is and all of that stuff.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And it's, yeah, I mean, if you basically you're doubling everything. If you take a real normal production and then double that on everything you have to be accountable for because you're now dealing with the 3D space and the physical space
Because,
to create one.
yeah, your gaffer can't move the lights in the Unreal space, right? It's a different skill set.
I was having a round table the other day and we were talking about virtual gaffers, someone who literally is just responsible for the lighting within the 3D world. Because then there's this sort of, I guess there's this grey area, right, between the art department owning the size of the mountain or the asset in there, right? Then there's the lighting, which would normally be the cinematographer and the gaffer if it was a real thing. So yeah, so there is this doubling up of that's required because these are particular skills where you can go, well, yeah, that's relatively easy thing to do, but you want to do that? That's a bit tricky. Cinematographers, you can't expect them to know about gaming engines.
There is a doubling up for sure. And again, it's the scale of the project. I find commercial work, there isn't like some commercials and branded content where we've used a wall, and specifically shot virtual production for the scene. I did my own virtual art department work. I did my own that because it wasn't in the budget. I did my own directing because it wasn't in the budget. It was just, okay, I do everything in that one moment kind of thing. And that's not the ultimate, like I can do it, but it's not how I desire to work all the time. I want to collaborate with people. I want to, work on those opportunities where if we're using virtual production, then we're working with a team and that's part of the process.
But have you had experience with image-based lighting?
Yes.
Where, yeah, so talk about that because we've had Eric on, who's a great exponent of it, and we're going to have a couple of other people on to talk about it in a bit more depth. But I think from just a cinematographer's point of view, it's a really. What's your take on it? What's your sort of? How would you explain it to someone from a
To me.
cinema? Yeah,
Explain it to me.
actually, explain it to Michelle. Yeah.
Sure. Image-based lighting, also known as IBL, is a freestanding shape, rectangle or tall. You can build it as big or small, medium as you like. It is a light source. Unlike the tiles that the wall is made of, those are pixels. And pixels emit light. They're not intended to throw light. They emit light as a computer screen emits light. Image-based lighting is built with diodes, LED diodes, intended to throw the light. But what the tool does, the image-based light does, is it takes a feed from Unreal Engine. So the same image is pumping through the surface of that. And the same pattern is being pushed out onto your subject here. That you would see behind you in the image.
I have just realised that I didn't know the term, but at Lambda, the drama school that I work at, there is a sumo sky, which reads the Unreal Engine. So that is image-based lighting. It's just I hadn't heard the phrase. So that's,
Every day's a learning day, right?
Every day's a school day.
Right?
Brilliant.
Excellent.
Right.
That's a great explanation.
How was your experience of using it?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't think it's for everything, but I think if you get it right, it works. I think the best place that I've had success with it is in car scenes in virtual production studios that are specifically set up with low ceilings on hydraulics that you can move around and shape around the car to build a sort of universal scene or plate, if it's a simulation driving plate, over the car, the vehicle, and then through the window of the driver. And I would put an image-based light. At the time, I used a Kino light that was called Mimic. And they were one of the first to design the image-based lights. And that pattern and scene would then run through the mimic and then create a very subtle but distinct, similar, the exact pattern of what the rest of the scene was seeing.
Yeah.
All right. So I tell you what, we're going to go to another break this time to hear from our sponsors. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about your thoughts about talking to other DOPs about your experiences, about how they might want to get involved, that kind of thing. So come back in a minute. See you in a bit.
See you in a bit.
Oh, hello. It's a bit quiet in here without an ad, but it doesn't have to be. Maybe you want to reach filmmakers, producers, and creatives who are all about the latest innovations in film, TV, advertising, corporate content, or social media. Got a game-changing tool that saves time and money? A virtual production studio that no one's heard of? But hey, you've got free snacks. Or maybe you just want to remind everyone that you're the best brand out there. Well, this silence, it could be yours. Get in touch at startingpixel.com and let's fill this space with something a little bit more exciting. The Starting Pixel podcast. Why film it any other way? Welcome back, everyone, after that short break. So, Sarah, thank you so much. So we've spoken about your background and sort of your experiences with using virtual production. So the next bit would be really good to get your sort of take on, if a DOP is listening to this, what should they... I guess, what should they do, right? Is this a thing? Is it not a thing? Is it complicated? Yeah, what's your sort of advice, I guess, of why someone should sort of investigate or use it?
Yeah, my feeling as a cinematographer, personally, I feel that it's my responsibility to stay abreast of technology. It doesn't mean I have to know every detail about every piece of technology because it's too much. I genuinely have an interest in virtual production and technology and Unreal Engine. I'm learning more about that too. So if you're interested in it, then go down the rabbit hole and see what happens. If you're not interested in it, but you are being asked to potentially shoot with it, and I do get contacted by people at times asking me for some guidance because they've been offered a commercial or a job and the use of virtual production is going to happen, but they've never used it and they're quite intimidated by it. So I just offer a few words of confidence. One thing I do see sometimes in various levels of production is that a virtual production supervisor, which is a very big job, and I think a VPS should be a head of department, in the respect of things, because so many things could go wrong and it all comes down to them. And they have a massive responsibility and checklist along with talking to so many departments they have to integrate. So I really respect, a good virtual production supervisor, and that, in world, I find that they will pick up the slack for DPs that don't know what they're doing. And I say that respectfully because there's a learning curve, but I also feel for VPSs, which is why I take it upon myself to be as good as I can to understand their language, to make their jobs easier.
There's Rob, you were at a BFI Screen Skills Roundtable, weren't you, the other week?
I was.
And there was a lot of discussion on should the VP supervisor be a head of department, and I think I think that's kind of there is a sense, there's a beginning to be a real understanding that actually, like you say, not all DPs know that, because there is a learning curve.
It is,
because you don't just get onto LED volume to shoot unless something's happening, right?
I've met some DPs that haven't even shot in virtual production and they're starting to learn about it. And then they turn around and say, so I could be a VPS. And I was like, no.
The complexity of that role, I think that's the thing. I think the complexity of that role is fascinating, isn't it?
I explain it is a little bit around, from my background at Microsoft and Salesforce and big tech. You have these people called systems architects, and they have to know every single system a large company might have and how they interact with each other, and then being able to advise which things, because you're talking about networking, you're talking about media serving, you're talking about game engines, complex. There's C++ you can write in, and you've got to know whether that's possible or whether that's what you're trying to, and then down to the lighting, right? And that virtual gaffering and understanding what is possible and what is. I mean, it's a really huge job that if you're brought in late down the pipeline, the process is that much harder. I mean, it's so much harder. Hell of a lot easier if it's a lot earlier on, because you're able to advise the producers and the DOPs and the directors about, you know, what's possible and what isn't.
And that's the thing that people need to understand. And I kind of think, you know, I think it's that kind of production pipeline. And from, again, from a theatre background, kind of the theatre process is much more akin to the virtual, to working on an LED volume in virtual production than the traditional TV and film process where all that work is done in post. You're just like, actually, in the theatre, you'll sit down 6 weeks before the production, and you wouldn't dream of not bringing every head of department into those conversations early on, because their job is to problem solve. Yeah, I think, it's the VP supervisor is key. Is key.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Huge respect to the VPS,
Mm.
and as much as I communicate as a head of department, and I can communicate to the OSVP team and the VPS, I'm good with that.
Here's another question. I was talking to someone today about it, actually. In ownership of what those the photons hitting that light sensor when you're talking virtual production, who's responsible for that? Because that's also a thing, right?
Yeah, so ownership over that final look of light.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the cinematographer's name is on it, right? In the credits, director of photography, cinematographer, so and so, which to anybody watching it, whether or not it's virtual that is behind the scene, it's so they are responsible for it. I feel responsible for it. I like to put care into that. This is something I talk to other cinematographers about and people in general when we have those discussions, is that the color itself, not so much the light, but the color and the color management is what's something I'm really interested in generally, and color science, which is sort of another topic, but it's that follow through. That color is coming from the 3D world. It can be then replicated into production design. It's coming from lighting and lens choices, filter choices, LUT choices. It's passing again from Unreal Engine processor, LED wall, camera sensor, filters, DIT, colorist, VFX. The color is changing hands multiple times.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, it's the executives that are signing off on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as much as I would put creative intent into that and try and be a part of every step of the process, and I offer up to be a step of the process, whether I'm paid for it or not, because I care about it, and my name is on it, right? So I do feel a responsibility for it. And I also surrender at the same time that it changes hands, and that the traditional methods of cinematography, where it was basically the cinematographer was the only person who would know what the film was going to look like after shooting it, that magic and that keep is now completely different. And I think that cinematographers traditionally felt like guardians of that in a very passionate way. And I have heard and again engaged with cinematographers on those conversations from different parts of the world who come from a very traditional film background and are older than myself. And it is a hard emotional space for them to separate themselves from that.
Yeah.
And I respect both because I'm in the middle. I started in film. I was there right when the digital changeover happened.
Yeah.
I've worked in broadcast. I've worked in film. I've kind of done all of this stuff. So as a technologist perspective and as a cinematographer today, I am surrendering to the process that it is now because I just want to create, and it's not about my ego. It's about the creative collaboration, and that's completely changing.
Interesting. Very interesting. Incredibly interesting, really, actually. It's like the approach and the, you know, to your point about people who've been doing it a particular way for a particular length of time. Technology has this really nasty thing of coming along and sort of pulling the rug underneath those types of traditional methods of doing stuff, right? And that's a fact. It's a fact of life. Technology gets cheaper, faster, and
Mhm.
easier to use.
And it's always going to depend on what you're making, right? You know, hopefully on certain projects, the DP is always going to come into the grade. You know, color changes again in the grade, right? But
Mhm.
I would expect a DP to come into the grade and be present and take ownership of that. But also the director's going to have a feel, and the executive's going to have a feel, and then the channel is going to have a yes, but we're aiming it at this audience, and therefore we want this feel. And hopefully, again, those discussions have happened early enough that nothing is a shock. But if
Mhm.
you're working collaborative, I can't say that
I
word
can
now,
say,
collaboratively with
don't
a
ask
team
me.
of people that you want to make work with and that you have a similar taste with. That's the aim, isn't it? Right, to find your people and to create
Yeah.
brilliant work with your
Yeah, it's trust. It's a lot of trust.
mm.
And again, I
Good
think
word.
from a cinematographer's perspective, that is, like it's hard to give up for a lot of people. And I have just surrendered.
It has to be about trust. I think that as you say your name's on it. As an actor, I'm like, yeah, my face is on it.
Yeah.
And when it's not lit well, I have to say every job I go on, my first thing is like, is this going to be good? It's rarely about the director, it's about the DP. I'm like, is this lit well? Is it going to look nice? And the second you step on set, you're just like, oh no. Or you're like, God, this is going to be brilliant. And yeah.
That's a very. Oh, we could go down a rabbit hole of actually that psychology of. So we will have to do this. This is going to. I'm going to write this down for another episode. The psychology of the set, actually, when it comes down to actual using tech, because I mean your point, Sarah, it is down to trust, right? And there is that sort of big difference between someone who really wants to hold on to something, but it's
Mhm.
their baby. This is mine. This is my passion. And then to your point, again, it's like, but surrendering it. It's like, I've got to trust this team,
Yeah.
these people to do what I need them to do. And that's a tough, especially when it's new, all used new. And we're using words
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
lumens and, these weird stuff that, anyway, but that's
Mhm.
hopefully the point of doing this podcast, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point too, Rob, because one thing I talk about when I do talks on DP is a couple of things. One is story, and another outside of virtual production, whether it is or in it or not, and whether it's documentary or scripted fiction. One of the things I've learned over time of going through this process of becoming and being a cinematographer throughout my career is that my most important job is to capture the emotion.
Mm.
And it's not the technology that dominates, although it can. One thing I'm trying to get better at is making that space. And really, once all the tech is set and all the crazy stuff, then it's like, okay, quiet. Just give a director and an actors that room. And I've always liked to light, even in fiction and reality TV indie work and stuff like that I've done. I'd always try and just light with ambience and get the room right, get the scene right, get the mood right, and just let them do whatever they needed to do, unless it was a close up and I need to walk something in. I've never liked having to change all the light setups. And, one, because I never had the luxury of time. So I became efficient at that. So I carry that into a virtual production space. I try and get the ambience and the tone and the scene and then just let them have the space for that. And then whether we're doing a camera move or not, it's that. But I push back really hard on teams that are on the technical side and producers that are kind of like, we're running out of time, kind of this, to just create this bubble of safety for what's about to go down in front of the lens. Because if that doesn't go down well, then I can't make it better. And it's so important for everybody to be aware of that, even so you put that into virtual production and there's twice as much technology and there's a VPS and then a whole other set of things going on. And it's like, wow, that intensity for an actor to focus and a director to have that space is like almost crushed, even
Right.
more. So
Mm.
try to give it some more
Interesting.
breathing room. which is the story.
The actors, and the actors have to do a different thing in virtual production. You know, sometimes it surrounds them, but often it's behind them and they can't see it as if they were. And, you know, they can see it more than in green screen, which is amazing. But also, it's not the real world. The weather isn't there. The wind isn't in their hair. So there's a kind of, and again, that feels theatrical. Do you know what I mean? Because actually, when actors are working well in theatre, there's a suspension of disbelief, and there's an imaginative space which is completely different.
Yeah. Because we're trying to tell a story. We're all trying to tell a story. You know, there is one story that is trying to be expressed in the moment. And Rob, I even talked about this at the Starting Pixel Live. It was like the story can get lost in virtual production, in 3D worlds, in the concerns with everything being just right to make the shot believable. And I don't ever want to lose sight of the reason that we're there, which is to tell the story. So yes, I have to make decisions about technical things. Yes, we have to do all that. And what's the best decision for the story is one of my favorite fallbacks and safety nets to help me guide a team to where I need us to be technically, so that I'm not struggling with a virtual side of a decision-making process. I'm like, okay, well, I will compromise, but what's the best decision for the story? Are you making this about you, or are you making this about what we have to achieve?
Yeah. So we'll be coming up to the end of it. Are you going to ask something, Michelle?
No, I wasn't. I was just loving that answer.
No, it's
It was
great.
just making me joyful.
If you so last question, although it might be 3 questions, but last question: if you were trying to give some advice, I guess, to the cinematographer about, and they've not come across it, but they've really, you know, they've been given the project, or this is a thing that they want to do. What would you be your, I don't know, top bit of advice, or top 5 bits of advice, or don't go to 10 because we've only got a few minutes.
Experiment, try and access a facility or an education space where you can run some tests and experiments. Don't be afraid to, you know, ask questions, and there are no wrong explorations. As a cinematographer, it's a feeling for me. Everything, I keep going back to my intuition and the soft skills more and more and more to dissipate the overtouch thing of what this world can be. And so I'd say don't be afraid to express yourself and find that what feels right.
I guess find the right a good crew as well, right? You literally do know what they're doing.
Yeah, but I think it's, you know, it's a journey. It's all a journey, and you know, sometimes you only get to work with one person once.
True that.
It depends on the project, you know. So I think work on this and try and do that.
Yeah, but the tech's coming, right?
Thank
Brilliant.
you so much, Sarah. It was so lovely to catch up and
you too.
And really hear you talking about stories. Sarah and I worked together in LA 18 months ago, and it was so fast and so quick that like there wasn't time to, you know, it's really nice to have a kind of creative, artistic conversation. It's lovely.
Yeah, definitely. And hearing the passion. Right.
Yeah. Very special. Thank you.
She's brilliant, eh?
She's great. I love DPs talking about story, and that's kind of is what it is, you know, like whether it's short form, 90 seconds, or a feature or a series. That's kind of that's what we're in it for, right?
Yeah, one of the big dangers is always having technologists try and, I guess, influence the story, because they're very passionate about the technology, and you can put so many tools, whistles and bangs into something, and it never works, or it never feels right.
For me, I think though that I think technologists should influence story. It's just about when the technologists influence the story, and I think again, that's the thing, that's the pipeline that we're talking about, and kind of the way in which we work and when people come in. You know, if a technologist influences the story really last minute because they're trying to throw loads of bangs and whistles in, then that's not great. But if a director and a production team is worth their salt, people will come on at the beginning, and those conversations should happen early enough that nobody is disappointed. Now, we don't work in that perfect world.
Right.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
But I think that's where we're heading for, right? We're heading towards a place where collaborative. I can't even say.
You can't say it. There was
Never not been able to say that word.
no, no. There was, what did they say? It hubs of creativity. I think I read somewhere, in actual fact, VP Studios can, when it's working and everything is, all of the is humming. There's no problems with Genlock, or there's no flicker. Everything's running, nothing's falling over. The hub of create that you could is palpable sometimes. The
It's
excitement and glee.
and actually it's really exciting because often directors and creatives don't get to work with those VFX people. Historically,
Right.
that's not all, like, those aren't people that you tend to work with.
Right.
Those people come in after the process, and you go into the room with them afterwards, of course, but it is palpable.
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
All right then. Have
Thanks,
a good
Rob.
weekend.
Have a nice night. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.